Continuing along in the Louisville Bowling Green prep, it's time to know the foe with the Falcons.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome in to this Friday edition of the Locked On the Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my 6th year covering U of L, 4th year hosting this show, and I want to take the time to thank you all so much for making us your first listen of the day. Show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Be sure to leave a comment in the YouTube section below, because that's a great way to help the show continue to grow. It is much appreciated. I figured to better understand what Louisville is going up against on Saturday, let's bring in someone who covers Bowling Green. So that's what we did. Michael Burwell, Bowling Green football beat writer for The Blade, a publication out of Toledo, joining us for the show today to tell us all about the Falcons. Michael, welcome in. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. So we're going to discuss some of the main storylines from the other side of things. We, of course, talk about this matchup in its entirety from the Louisville side, but let's talk about the Bowling Green offense. Let's talk about the Eddie George tenure. Let's talk about what we're going to see from the Bowling Green defense and much more. But first, today's episode of the show brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. Michael, we'll start out with the most pressing question, and I'm sure that this might kind of become cliche, but I got to ask you about this guy right here. I didn't know, Michael, I didn't know about Pudge the Cat until preparing for this game. I suppose I've been living underneath a rock, but this guy is becoming an absolute internet sensation. What can you kind of tell me about being that close to what's going on in the feline world with Pudge the Cat?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, Pudge the Cat, just absolutely unbelievable. Just literally brought a team together, and just the media just kind of circus since then has been absolutely unbelievable. It's just so, obviously, the Pudge's owner, long-snapper George Carlson, brought him in to kind of boost morale after a tough practice. And wide receiver Finn Hogan has a heck of a following on social media, and he posts that practice is so tough that they have a locker room cat, and it's Pudge. And just from there, just absolutely has gone crazy. And BG's done a great job of marketing Pudge. I think they have T-shirts. He's been at I think every game so far. He during a timeout, he got to they drove a golf cart out on the field, and there's Pudge and camera right there, and just it is. It's hard to believe that. Eddie George is their head coach, a Heisman Trophy winning running back. It's just, which is amazing in itself. And Pudge is basically stealing all the headlines at this point. So it's been pretty fun to kind of see what's been happening with Pudge the Cat.
Hey man, he's got his own press pass for the game against Louisville. But you mentioned it when I was preparing to talk about Louisville's opponents this offseason. I was like, Eddie George, the head coach. And I realized that, he did a really good job at Tennessee State, took that program from a really low standing to, before he left, to share the conference title. So it seems like, there are plenty of former star athletes that get into coaching and they really just kind of don't find their footing. But it feels like Eddie George is one of those up and comers that seems like he could be really, really good in the coaching world. Coming into Bowling Green after the Falcons almost pulled off a couple big upsets last year against A&M and Penn State. What can you kind of tell me about your thoughts coming into this, arrangement between George and Bowling Green, and how have those thoughts kind of evolved through 3 games that you've seen from the Falcons so far?
Yeah, well, obviously with someone like Eddie George, there's just such an aura around him. You see him at practice and everything like that, in the spring, in the fall. It's you can feel his presence there. he's really done such a good job of kind of bringing the team together. He was hired at such a tough time, like in early March. Everyone's going through spring practice at this time, and BG has to find a new head coach. And sure enough, Urban Meyer, obviously, he got his coaching career started at Bowling Green. And, he talked with Bowling Green's athletic director, Derek Vandermeer, and basically told him one person for the job, and that's Eddie George. And, athletic director and Eddie George got to talking, and sure enough, they got a deal. And, Eddie George has been just super, the positivity, he really cares about his players. He cares about his coaches. And he just, you can see it, every time he speaks, every time he's out there. It's just really impressive how much he cares about football now too. He's obviously done so much in his life, even outside of football. He was on Broadway, everything like that, got a master's, and he got back into coaching football, or got into coaching football, and he has enjoyed every single second of it. He's kind of hit the ground running. Obviously was so good at Tennessee State, especially the last couple of years. They made the FCS playoffs. And, returning to Ohio is something that's really special to him as well. He's just really hit the ground running here at Bowling Green. The community obviously loves him. Bowling Green is a really good college town. They really care about the university and the athletic department there and everything like that. And George has really kind of immersed himself in the community with different events and stuff like that. So he's really gotten that aspect down, really embracing, what Bowling Green State University means to the area. And as far as the product on the field, through this is their best start in 11 years. It's still very early in the season, 2-1. But, they played a pretty solid Cincinnati team, tough down at Cincinnati. They just beat Liberty, which is one of the top group of 5 programs in the country, especially the last couple of years. And they've done it in a variety of ways. This team has fully embraced what Coach George is preaching to them. And it's really impressive to see that.
So kind of looking ahead to this particular game, I'll tell you what Louisville is thinking, at least from the fan base perspective, is they covered the spread against James Madison, but the offense kind of struggled. JMU threw a lot of unexpected things at them, pulled out all the stops. They made life difficult for them, but Louisville ended up getting enough big plays to where they won the game. But this game, it feels like even with the 26.5-point spread, there's no overlooking Bowling Green. It's just trying to get back on track ahead of ACC play. When you flip the script and focus on how Bowling Green sees this game, of course, this is right before they will play Ohio and get into that conference schedule after this. What's sort of the vibe around this game? Like, how do you view this game from the Bowling Green side of things?
Honestly, Bowling Green wants to go down there and, make they want to make a statement, and, they feel like they can compete with anybody. They've shown over the past several years, even before Eddie George took over, they can compete with any of these top dogs in Power Conference. You kind of mentioned, they played Texas A&M and Penn State, extremely tough, lost both of those games by 13 combined points, on the road in those hostile environments, probably 2 of the toughest environments in the country. Yeah. And, 2 years ago, they went down to Georgia Tech, and I was there for that game, and Georgia Tech gets off to a quick lead, and all of a sudden BG takes over, and they didn't let up. BG stuns Georgia Tech like 38-27, just played outstanding. So this program, there is a lot of confidence, heading in big matchups. They fully embrace teams that play in bigger stadiums, to play against Power Conference opponents. And, obviously they have their hands full. Louisville is definitely a strong program and a solid program. But BG feels like they can make some noise. They're good. They're solid in all 3 phases, especially special teams. Their defense has played well. Offense has been kind of hit or miss so far, but they're looking to go down there and and compete and, try to pull off another kind of stunning upset.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to think that you can pull it off to even have a chance to do so, right? Like you have to, have that confidence in yourself. And from how Bowling Green over the past couple of seasons has performed against Power 4 competition, there is probably a little bit more confidence for them than maybe perhaps some other MAC schools that might project to even be a little bit better, but it's kind of a mindset thing. And you mentioned it, the offense has kind of struggled a little bit. I do want to ask you a little bit more about what Eddie George's offense is going to bring to the Derby City on Saturday. And we'll discuss what it is that the offense does well, what they need to improve on, all that coming up on this episode of Locked on Louisville, covering your team every day. Today's episode of the show brought to you by Mazda, moving the game forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do mean more than putting points on the board. They move crowds, culture, and keep the game moving forward. I know that, of course, the Cardinals were on a bye this past week, but the week before that, the spotlight was on Clev Lubin. 10 tackles against James Madison, forced the fumble in the end zone to give the Cardinals their first lead, had 1.5 sacks, 1.5 tackles for loss. The Coastal Carolina transfer was on fire. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like that, there's more to every highlight. There's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. And before we tell you more about the Bowling Green offense, I want to tell you about our friends over at Wayfair. The weather's cooling down. Thankfully, it's about time. The days are getting shorter, and that has me wanting to make my home feel even cozier. And when it comes to cozifying your space this fall, so to speak, Wayfair is the place to go. It has everything you need to set the mood for the season, whether it's comfy recliners, warm bedding, autumn decor, or even an espresso machine so you can make your favorite latte at home on game days. For me, it's all about redecorating for the fall. It's a part of the year that I absolutely love, and I go to Wayfair to get all my cozy throw blankets or even my new chair. It's like absolutely transforming my space. Cozify your space with Wayfair's curated collection of easy, affordable fall updates, from comfy recliners to cozy bedding and autumn decor. You'll find it all the way for less at wayfair.com. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Continuing on along in our discussion with Michael Burwell, Bowling Green. Is it Bowling Green State or Bowling Green? Because it listed as Bowling Green, but I've always remembered it as Bowling Green State.
Yeah, it's definitely Bowling Green State. It's either Bowling Green State University or just Bowling Green. So definitely not Bowling Green University, but yeah.
It's weird how like it's listed, because like I remember it's always been like BGSU to me, and then you go look everywhere and it's like, well, Louisville versus Bowling Green, and I'm like, okay, well, whatever. But Michael Burwell, football beat writer for BGSU over at the Blade in Toledo. Michael, taking a look at this offense, it's been sort of a rough go from a yardage perspective. 114th in the country out of 134 teams in total offense, averaging just under 315 yards per game. What can you kind of tell me about the state of the Bowling Green offense? It seems like one that is going to try to establish the run. What has, or for this matter, what hasn't been working to the way that it should for this offense?
Yeah, well, Eddie George wants to establish the run. That's kind of what the identity they want to bring is. There's so much turnover, on the offense. They did bring back pretty much their entire starting offensive line and brought in a really good transfer who had a lot of experience. So the offensive line is solid. Their top 4 running backs from last year. They lost, I think, their top 2 or 3 wide receivers. Lost their quarterback. So there's a ton of new faces, especially at the skill positions for BGSU. They brought in quarterback Drew Pyne from Missouri. He's also played at Arizona State, Notre Dame. He's been in college for a while.
A little bit of a journeyman.
And running backs, yes. They're still trying to kind of find that camaraderie and that chemistry on offense. I mean, there's with just so many new players, there's definitely a learning curve in that regard. And I think that maybe hindered them a little bit. One thing about the offense, though, that has been impressive through 3 games, 0 turnovers. They have not lost the ball once. They do really intense drills in practice to force turnovers and to keep in ball security drills. And quarterback Drew Pyne, he's done a good job of basically just taking what the defense is giving him. You know, he hasn't forced anything. He has gotten sacked, a handful of times. But for the most part, he's been able to control the game. And so the offense definitely isn't, where they want it to be, but there's still so much of a learning curve, and that, still might take a few games, still take some time, but they have some pretty good athletes at tight end and wide receiver. When they do get the ball in open space, running back, they have some pretty shifty running backs who, a couple of them basically just haven't played. They're really young players, a couple transfers that have had some success at previous schools. But there's just a lot of kind of new pieces, and Eddie George is basically giving everyone an opportunity to showcase what they have.
Michael, so Drew Pyne, of course, like we mentioned, journeyman, started his career out at Notre Dame, had a pretty decent 2022, ended up going to Arizona State and then Missouri, and now I guess is ending his career at Bowling Green. I don't imagine he has another year of eligibility, but who knows in today's NCAA landscape. Only 2 passing touchdowns through the first 3 games. That would kind of, coexist with the line of thinking that they're trying to establish running the football. What have you seen from him? It seems like that it feels like Eddie George is trying to establish a lot of RPOs, getting the ball to receivers out in space on the boundaries. What can you tell me about Drew Pyne through the first 3 games of his Falcons career?
Yeah, he just hasn't forced anything, a lot of kind of easy passes. He's definitely, kind of finding his first target and going there, either wide receivers out wide, or else to his tight ends or running backs, a lot of screen plays. He's just, against Cincinnati, he was outstanding, close to 300 yards passing, 29 of 36 passing overall. Really, they moved the ball really well. And then against Liberty, just kind of struggled a little bit. Liberty's defense was playing pretty decently. So it's kind of been a little bit of a mixed bag so far with Drew Pyne being quarterback. But at the end of the day, he hasn't turned the ball over. He's put BG in a position basically to win the game. He hasn't done anything just, extremely out of the ordinary. It's kind of just been taking what the defense has given him and going from there.
So against this Louisville defense, it's one that they just lost one of the big-time playmakers, Stanquan Clark, out for the year. It's a brutal blow for this defense, but they do have some pieces at linebacker that are going to step up. But it's a defense that's going to try to get after the passer as much as they can. I mentioned Clev Lubin in the Mazda read. He has been as good as advertised. A.J. Green and Wesley Bailey on the other side. You mentioned, you've returned some guys on the line, but they've given up some more pressures than maybe you would like. With this Bowling Green team, do you think that there's going to be more of an emphasis on trying to play fast to try to counteract that Louisville pass rush, or is it going to be still, we're going to try to run the football, and if you stop that, then we'll kind of go from there?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell because they have the ability to do both. They're not afraid every once in a while to really try to pick up the pace. But I think at the end of the day, they really want to control the time of possession, stay on the field as much as possible, obviously give Louisville less opportunities on offense to score. I think that's kind of what it's going to come down to, is they want to have some long sustained drives and to be able to put points up against them. I'm pretty sure they almost doubled the time of possession against Cincinnati. So they obviously Cincinnati had some really quick scoring drives and quick scores, but BGSU really controlled the clock. And you look at the Georgia Tech game a couple years ago, it was like a mind-boggling difference. I think BG had the ball for like 42 minutes in that game, which is really impressive. So I think at the end of the day, BG wants to just run the clock, convert third downs, which they've been respectable at doing that this year, and just have long sustained drives and being able to cap it off with points.
Understood. And you kind of look over to that Bowling Green defense, and for the most part, statistically and from the metrics, pretty respectable. Even considering that they played a Power 4 opponent in that mix. They gave up 34 to Cincinnati, but passing the test against Lafayette and Liberty, this is probably going to, well, it's no probably about it, this is going to be their biggest test from a personnel standpoint and possibly their most important defensive test as a unit through the season. So we'll dive into what Eddie George's defense has to offer and how they're going to try to make life miserable for the Louisville Cardinals on Saturday, all coming up on the final segment of Locked On Louisville, your team every day. Card Nation, I want to tell you about our friends over at Square. Look, this is one of those situations to where your favorite neighborhood spots run on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home, whether it's the local sports bar packed on game days, the coffee shop that knows my order by heart, shout out to that place, by the way, or to the corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. There are places that bring the people together. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. It's the kind of place where you walk in terms of my coffee shop, it's the kind of place you walk in and everyone knows your name. The staff is like family and they've been serving the community for years. And that's why Square has become such a huge partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockedoncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did, just like me. Square, see you in the neighborhood. And before we get into the next segment, it's time to tell you about our friends over at DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Cardinals versus Falcons. Battle of the Birds on Saturday. Time to look back and crown the previous week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving you more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered the most. Let's break it down. Well, I told you in the Mazda read, it's the same for the DoorDash read. Cleve Lubin was the player of the game who delivered in a big way against the James Madison Dukes. That critical force fumble in the second half that ended up giving Louisville their first lead of the game. Cleve came through, no hesitation, no delay. You know the performance wasn't a fluke because he's been doing it ever since he stepped foot on campus. And just like Cleve delivered for the Cardinals, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash Streaks. You save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Into the final segment with BGSU football beat writer for The Blade in Toledo, Michael Burwell, delivering all the insight that we need regarding Eddie George's first team at Bowling Green. And my gosh, it's still weird that Eddie George is coaching Bowling Green. And it's always awesome when you see, star players go to coach schools. But this defense, unlike the offense, from the metrics, looks at the very worst serviceable. 60th in total defense, allowing 320.7 yards per game. And then they're in the top 50, number 47 in scoring defense, only 18 points per contest given up. Of course, context matters in terms of the teams that you're playing. But even with a unit that's lost some considerable production from last season, still getting the job done. What's going right for Eddie George's defense?
Yeah, they're just collectively they're playing really well as a whole. The run defense has been pretty solid to start. Liberty had some success a little bit last week, but they completely shut down Lafayette. Even Cincinnati. Cincinnati threw the ball a lot, but they did respectable against Cincinnati's run defense. So that's been a good start. And BG's got two linebackers who have just been outstanding so far. Gideon Lamprin, he transferred from Dayton. He was a first-team FCS All-American last year. Just outstanding player. He's stepped right into the FBS level and excelled. They have a sophomore linebacker in Dorian Pringle who's been remarkable. He played a lot last year, didn't start, but he's really stepped in a good role. The secondary, they bounced back last week against Liberty. They had a really, really tough outing against Cincinnati because they tried so hard to stop the run. They basically just threw their cornerbacks and safeties on an island and everything. But just overall, the defense has had bright spots at each level, and they've forced turnovers as well. They had 4 turnovers against Liberty last week, and throughout that game, the third play of the game, BG recovers a fumble, and then even in the fourth quarter, they forced 2 turnovers when the game was still relatively tight early on there. So the Liberty game, it kind of felt like at some point the Flames were going to break through on offense and put up some points, and because they really have a good offense, and that just never happened. And I think that says a lot to BG's defense. They really just fly to the ball, just like on offense. It's all about the run game, and they're trying to stop the run and everything. But the linebackers have been outstanding. The secondary has some talented players. There's a couple young players out there, sophomores, redshirt freshmen that are getting a lot of time. But for the most part, they've been doing well. The defensive line lost like their entire production from last year, pretty much. Only a couple players returned. They had to kind of go through the portal. Eddie George's son, Eric George, went from Tennessee State to BG as well, and he had a couple sacks the last game. So I think he can continue to grow and be a force on the defensive line. So, they just collectively, they do a good job of getting to the ball. They do a good job of tackling. And these last couple of games, they've been able to force turnovers.
I read your article in that recap from last week against Liberty. And I mean, it's kind of like video game numbers for that defense: 4 turnovers forced, 4 sacks. I mean, only giving up 13 points. I mean, in terms of a bounce back, that's what you hope for. And I kind of want to get your perspective on this because I asked a friend of mine who is one of the hosts for another local podcast about this last night Wednesday. Sorry. James Madison went all out against Louisville. They went feast or famine, 0 blitz at times. Like, they really switched things up. They forced Louisville to try to create big plays. They stacked the box, right? So I wonder, in terms of how Bowling Green might take from what James Madison did, and I made the point that I'm not sure that any team delivers an exact carbon copy, but they're going to take away from that. Do you think that this is a situation where Bowling Green's defense could get uber aggressive? They stack the box, forcing Louisville to try to activate that passing game and say, you know what? We're going to do everything in our power not to allow Isaac Brown to beat us on the ground, and Duke Watson for that matter.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely the game plan for BG is they have to slow down Brown, and they have to stop the run. I think I'd like to think it'll be a pretty similar game plan to what they had against Cincinnati, and with the secondary bouncing back like they did last week against Liberty, I think that's going to give them some confidence going into this game. But I think they're going to do everything they can to stop the run. I mean, that's number one for them. So Eddie George had extremely high praise for Isaac Brown in the press conference earlier this week. Obviously he's been outstanding for Louisville early in his career. So I think BG is definitely going to be aggressive in run defense. Maybe try to really put some pressure on the quarterback, and maybe once again kind of take a chance with that secondary with kind of putting them on an island a little bit. Cincinnati did outstanding in that regard. Getting the ball to their receivers, down the field, pretty much everywhere. But I know that Eddie George and that team, they don't want Brown to run all over them. They don't want to give up 200, 300 rushing yards. So I think they're going to absolutely sell out on stopping the run.
I think regardless if you can take these 2 team names away, I think regardless if one team does something really well and you game plan to stop that and they do it anyway. It's almost like a hit in the pride, and you're like, dang, man, I mean, we did everything we could. We pulled out all the stops, and here they are, just doing what they do. And I guess there are worse people to get high praise from than Eddie George, right? Heisman Trophy winner, one of the better running backs in NFL history. So Isaac Brown, I mean, find comfort in knowing that you're being noticed by some of the best of all time. But final question for you, Michael, before we let you out of here, and I definitely appreciate you coming on to the show and giving us some knowledge into Bowling Green. But I'm going to put you to the test. What's going to be your final score prediction? If you had to take a swing at it, what would be your score prediction?
Yeah, I think I mean, Louisville's going to put up some points. I think it's going to be kind of similar to the Cincinnati game where BG might find a little bit of success offensively. BG's special teams is outstanding. Maybe they can find a way to get a special teams score, but I'm thinking as far as the score, I think it's going to be somewhere around 31-13. Cincinnati winning, or I'm sorry, Louisville winning about, I think, 31-13.
It's funny because, Scott Satterfield coached Louisville before he randomly left in the middle of the night for Cincinnati. So, I watched that game. I'm kind of hoping, I wouldn't hate it if Bowling Green were able to pull this out against the Bearcats. No, but it's awesome to see two teams play that don't historically play. That's just kind of the beauty of college football, and hopefully that can still be the case as we continue through this weird era of scheduling and conference realignment, stuff like that. But Michael Burwell, BGSU football beat writer for the Blade in Toledo, does great work if you find yourself up in that Ohio area. But that is going to wrap up this episode of the show. Cards and Falcons tomorrow, 12 o'clock at L&N Cardinal Stadium. Of course, we will react after the game. Have a good weekend. Talk to you soon.